"Your boathouse is denied, Mr. Thornton." Those 5 words from an HOA president half my age cost her everything. When she slapped me with threatened $1,000 daily fines for building on my own lake, she never imagined I'd respond by creating a floating mansion that made her completely powerless. After 40 years of engineering structures that withstand hurricanes, I wasn't about to let a clipboard-wielding realtor dictate what I could build on my own property. Now I stand proudly on my shoreline while she fumes with rage, powerless as my luxury floating home has become the envy of the entire community. What happens when bureaucrats pick fights with the wrong engineer? They create their own worst nightmare. My name is Robert Thornton. At 58, after designing bridges across America that could withstand Category 5 hurricanes, I cashed in my retirement fund for what the realtor called a slice of Tennessee heaven, 15 acres with a private 3-acre lake, crystal clear water teeming with bass and surrounded by oak trees that had stood for generations. The property deed explicitly stated the water rights belonged exclusively to us, confirmed by our attorney, the county records office, and the previous owner. My wife Linda and I had simple dreams for our retirement. Morning coffee watching the sunrise over the water, teaching our grandchildren to fish from a modest boathouse, and quiet evenings on the lake. The day after we moved in, I was marking the shoreline for our future boathouse when a black Mercedes SUV pulled into our gravel driveway. Karen Davidson, the 35-year-old chair of the Architectural Review Committee, stepped out with confident precision, the HOA manual tucked professionally under her arm. "Mr. Thornton," she said, extending her hand with practiced cordiality. "Welcome to Whispering Pines. I see you're planning a waterfront project. You'll need to submit formal applications to my committee for approval." Her smile was polite but calculating. When I explained this was private property with deeded water rights, she shook her head with practiced patience. Every new resident believes that initially. Section 12.3 states that all external structures visible from any community property must adhere to HOA guidelines. She indicated a hiking trail barely visible through the trees. "That path has a view of your lake. Therefore, we have jurisdiction." As she departed, her final words carried a weight of experience. "I recommend not fighting this, Mr. Thornton. The HOA has a perfect record in these matters." I watched her car disappear, unaware I just encountered the catalyst for what would become the most satisfying project of my engineering career. I'm not a man who rushes into battle unprepared. I spent 3 weeks creating detailed plans for a modest 450-square-foot boathouse, single-story, using the same natural stone and timber as our main home, nestled discreetly among the trees at the water's edge. Every detail complied with county environmental guidelines, proper setbacks, sustainable materials, minimal shoreline impact. The county inspector reviewed my plans and said, "Robert, in 30 years, this is one of the most thorough applications I've seen. You've thought of everything." With county approval in hand, I began site preparation. The foundation footings were barely marked when 3 vehicles screeched to a halt at my property line. Karen, flanked by 2 board members, marched down to the lake, high heels sinking into the soft ground. "Cease and desist immediately." She thrust a formal letter into my hands. "This structure violates 17 separate HOA guidelines." I calmly produced my county permits and property deeds. "This lake is entirely on my property. The HOA has no jurisdiction here." Karen's expression hardened. She opened the HOA manual to page 37, paragraph 4. "All structures visible from community properties must maintain aesthetic harmony." Then pointed to a tiny section of the community trail barely visible through a quarter-mile of dense trees. "That's community property with a view of your lake." Within 48 hours, the HOA called an emergency meeting, scheduled deliberately during my grandson's birthday celebration, which I'd mentioned to Karen. Without hearing my defense, they voted 5-2 against my boathouse, citing contradictory violations. Simultaneously excessively ornate and too minimalist, both oversized and lacking substantial presence. Their rejection letter concluded with a threat. Unauthorized construction would result in daily $1,000 fines and immediate legal action. My first victory, small but significant, came when I formally requested the meeting minutes through a legal records request. Their secretary accidentally included an email from Karen sent before the meeting. We need to shut this down immediately. If Thornton gets his boathouse, others will want the same freedom. Control of the waterfront aesthetics is non-negotiable. This wasn't about rules, it was about power, control, and something else I couldn't yet identify. That evening, I called my neighbor Bill Henderson, a 72-year-old retired maritime attorney who lived 3 properties over. He'd won his own battle with Karen over his historically accurate purple front door, which violated the approved color palette, until he proved it was identical to the original 1890s farmhouse paint. The HOA regulations define structures as being physically connected to land through permanent foundations, Bill noted, studying my documents at his kitchen table. But what about something that floats? This ignited an 11-week deep dive into research. I studied maritime law, floating architecture, and examined every word of our HOA bylaws, all 126 pages. I consulted 3 specialized attorneys and discovered something remarkable. Floating structures on private waters fall under different legal classifications than land-based buildings. If designed properly, they're considered vessels outside traditional building codes. The county building commissioner confirmed my interpretation. A floating structure on private water with self-contained systems isn't subject to the same restrictions as land-based construction, provided it meets maritime safety standards. My engineering colleague Michael, who specialized in offshore oil platforms, laughed when I called him. So they won't let you build a boathouse, and your solution is to build an actual house that's technically a boat? That's the most engineer response to bureaucracy I've ever heard. I invested $3,200 in specialized legal consultations to confirm every angle, identifying 7 distinct legal precedents supporting my position. The maritime attorney's conclusion: the HOA can regulate structures attached to land, but a floating home? That's beyond their authority unless specifically mentioned in your bylaws. I rechecked our bylaws, not a single mention of floating structures, vessels, or boats anywhere in the document. The closest reference restricted permanent docks extending more than 10 feet from shore, which actually worked in my favor, as my floating home wouldn't be permanently attached to anything. My second victory came at the county records office, where I discovered the lake wasn't just outside HOA jurisdiction, it wasn't even included in the original HOA property maps filed 15 years earlier. The hiking trail had been extended to overlook the lake without proper documentation, making their claim of visibility from community property legally questionable. That night, showing Linda my preliminary sketches, I said, they wanted to fight an engineer with 4 decades of experience making impossible structures stand up to hurricanes. Let's show them what that really means. Instead of a modest boathouse, I began designing what would become the Defiance, a 600-square-foot architectural marvel that would blend seamlessly with our natural surroundings while showcasing cutting-edge engineering. I assembled an elite team, my former structural engineering partner from the California Coast Highway Project, an award-winning sustainable architect who specialized in minimal-impact homes, and a naval engineer whose floating research platforms withstood Arctic conditions. The foundation would use advanced pontoon technology with a computerized ballasting system ensuring perfect stability regardless of occupancy or weather conditions. The structure would incorporate carbon fiber reinforcements, technology I'd helped develop for earthquake-resistant bridges in Japan. Every aspect exceeded environmental standards. The roof and southern-facing walls integrated transparent solar panels providing 140% of our power needs. A closed-loop water filtration system would return water to the lake cleaner than when it entered. Rainwater collection would feed a hydroponic garden along the eastern deck. Linda's non-negotiable requirement: a floating herb garden accessible directly from the kitchen. The materials were selected for both beauty and sustainability. Reclaimed timber from a 19th-century barn being demolished nearby, weathered copper accents that would develop a natural patina matching the surrounding forest, natural stone quarry just 30 miles away. Every element would honor the landscape while creating a stunning counterpoint to the cookie-cutter beige homes the HOA typically approved. We designed 2 stories with floor-to-ceiling windows offering 360-degree views, wraparound decks on both levels, and a rooftop observation platform. The master bedroom would feature a glass floor section allowing us to watch fish from our bed. A retractable glass wall would transform the living room into an open-air pavilion on pleasant days. When the final renderings were complete, our architect whispered, "This will be in Architectural Digest within a year." The estimated cost, $475,000, nearly our entire remaining retirement savings. I looked at Linda, expecting hesitation. Instead, she smiled and said, "Some things are worth every penny, Robert. Let's build our floating middle finger to bureaucracy." Construction began on a crisp Monday morning. Our team started building the pontoon base on temporary platforms near the shore, carefully positioned on our property where the HOA had no jurisdiction. By Wednesday afternoon, Karen's black Mercedes was parked at our property line. She didn't approach, just sat with binoculars trained on our operation. By Friday, the HOA's attorney had called 3 times. I didn't return the calls, but had my attorney send a brief response. My client is constructing a vessel on his private property, which falls outside HOA jurisdiction per state maritime law. The pontoon base took shape over 3 weeks, an engineering marvel itself with 9 watertight compartments, advanced stability systems, and connection points for the upper structure. Each morning at precisely 7 a.m., our team would begin work, always in compliance with county noise ordinances. Neighbors began casually walking by. Initial suspicion turned to curiosity, then admiration as the unique design took shape. Several discreetly mentioned their own abandoned projects after HOA rejections. Our third victory came during the first county inspection. Karen arrived with the HOA attorney, attempting to join the official review. The inspector politely but firmly told them, "This is a county matter on private property. You'll need to wait outside the property line." Karen's face flushed as she watched from a distance, unable to influence the process. The cease and desist letter arrived by courier the next morning, citing 14 alleged violations of HOA architectural guidelines. My attorney's response was a masterpiece, a 27-page document explaining the legal distinction between structures and vessels, including case law, maritime regulations, and photographs documenting our compliance with all applicable laws. Karen escalated by having the HOA president, a retired banker who usually deferred to her committee decisions, call personally. "Robert, we're prepared to be reasonable. Submit standard plans for a conventional boathouse, and we'll fast-track the approval." "I've moved on from that concept," I replied. "My floating home doesn't require HOA approval, as your own bylaws confirm." The most satisfying moment came when Karen's husband approached me in the local hardware store. In a hushed voice, he made a formal offer, $95,000 to stop construction and sell the property to an approved buyer. I responded with architectural renderings of the completed project and a handwritten note. "Some things aren't for sale, but I appreciate your tacit acknowledgement of its value." Each attempt at intimidation only strengthened my resolve. When they complained about delivery trucks on our shared road, I coordinated with suppliers to schedule deliveries during broader time windows, keeping everything legal while maximizing their uncertainty. Karen's frustrated expressions each time a new component arrived became our daily entertainment. Our fourth victory came unexpectedly. The concrete foundation for the shore connection was inspected and approved in record time, with the county inspector commenting, "I've never seen such thorough specifications for what's essentially a glorified dock." The HOA called an emergency Saturday meeting, attempting to amend their bylaws to include floating structures and all vessels visible from community property. I attended with my attorney and 5 neighbors who had begun questioning Karen's authority. The amendment required 75% homeowner approval, 92 votes from the 123 homes. Karen had counted on apathy ensuring her victory. She hadn't counted on my 5th victory. I'd spent evenings visiting neighbors, sharing my designs and explaining the implications of unchecked HOA power. The amendment received only 43 votes, far short of the required threshold. Karen's face darkened as the results were announced. "This isn't over, Thornton," she muttered as I passed her chair. Their next attack, 7 anonymous claims of building code violations filed with the county. The inspector, now familiar with our meticulous approach, cleared each complaint immediately and shared something revealing. "This is the 8th complaint from the same anonymous source. We're now requiring identification for future complaints regarding your property. Then came environmental concerns filed with the state EPA. The environmental officer spent 4 hours inspecting our systems and left with copies of our filtration designs, saying, "I wish all waterfront properties used these standards. You're actually improving water quality." Our sixth victory arrived unexpectedly. The regional newspaper ran a feature on innovative housing, highlighting our project as merging environmental responsibility with architectural innovation. The article mentioned the HOA opposition, framing it as resistance to positive change. 23 neighbors sent supportive messages after reading it. Karen's most desperate attempt came when the HOA hired a wildlife specialist claiming the reflection from our windows would confuse migratory birds. My counter: documentation of our specially coated glass designed to be visible to birds, an enhancement I'd added after consulting with an ornithologist from the state university. Each obstacle became an opportunity to improve the design. When they complained about potential noise carrying across water, we enhanced our insulation. When they suggested our lights would disturb the lake ecosystem, we installed specialized directional lighting that actually reduced light pollution compared to conventional homes. By month 5, even Karen's allies on the board began questioning the mounting legal expenses, now exceeding $37,000, for what one member called a battle we didn't properly research. The HOA's insurance company sent a letter expressing concerns about potential liability exposure from pursuing legally questionable enforcement actions. Launch day arrived with perfect spring weather after 6 months of intensive construction. We invited friends, supportive neighbors, and local media. I'd arranged for professional photographers and videographers to document every moment, both for posterity and potential legal protection. The massive crane arrived at dawn, positioned carefully on reinforced ground at the lake's edge. By noon, the Defiance was carefully lifted and positioned over the water. As it was gently lowered onto the lake's surface, spontaneous applause broke out from the gathered crowd of nearly 60 people. The structure settled exactly as designed, its reflection perfectly mirroring the surrounding trees in the calm water. The solar systems activated immediately, LED indicators confirming all systems operational. The floating herb garden, Linda's non-negotiable requirement, looked as if it had always been there, already planted with rosemary, thyme, and mint. The local news covered the event live. When the reporter asked about the challenges we'd faced, I maintained diplomatic professionalism. Great innovation often requires navigating complex regulations. We're grateful to the county officials who helped ensure this project met all legal requirements while pushing the boundaries of sustainable living. 1 week after completion, as the golden afternoon sun bathed the lake in warm light, I stood on the grassy shore admiring my creation. My photographer friend was capturing images for the architectural magazine feature. The floating home gleamed in the center of the lake, its windows reflecting the sunset, the wraparound deck creating a perfect silhouette against the water. As I crossed my arms with quiet satisfaction, Karen's black Mercedes pulled up on the access road. She walked purposefully down the slope toward me, her professional demeanor visibly strained as she surveyed the completed project. "This undermines everything our guidelines were designed to protect, Thornton," she said, gesturing toward my floating home. "It's visible from half the community. This circumvents our entire regulatory framework." I remained composed. "Good afternoon, Karen. It's a perfect day to appreciate how innovation and regulations can coexist, isn't it? The board will need to address this precedent," she insisted, her voice tense but controlled. "I understand your concern," I replied evenly. "But this project is county approved, environmentally certified, and fully compliant with all applicable laws. Your own attorney has confirmed its outside HOA jurisdiction. I'd be happy to explain the sustainable features if you're interested." My photographer captured the moment perfectly, me standing beside my creation while Karen faced the reality that her regulatory overreach had been outmaneuvered not through defiance, but through careful legal innovation. That evening, Linda and I hosted our first sunset dinner on the upper deck. As the sky turned crimson over the water, our neighbor Bill raised his glass to the most beautiful act of malicious compliance I've ever witnessed. Our floating home had become more than a building. It was a symbol of standing your ground against unreasonable authority. As darkness fell, the subtle lighting illuminated our creation from within, creating what one guest called a lantern floating on the water. We'd achieved something remarkable, a home that was both a technical marvel and a work of art. What happened after our home's completion surprised everyone. While our property value increased by 42%, the ripple effects extended far beyond economics. Architectural Digest featured us in their Innovative Homes issue. Sustainability conferences requested case studies of our systems, and a documentary crew filmed our creation. The true victory wasn't just our beautiful home. It was how it transformed the community. Karen's iron grip on the HOA began slipping as residents questioned long-standing rules. The retired couple denied solar panels, resubmitted their request citing our precedent. A family challenged landscaping restrictions using our environmental impact data. When 3 board members requested a private tour, one confided, "This is the opposite of the eyesore Karen predicted. It's actually increasing property values across the neighborhood." 8 months after completion, I received an unmarked envelope containing HOA financial records and a handwritten note. "You should see this. Not everyone on the board knew." The documents revealed the true motivation behind Karen's crusade. Her brother-in-law owned Pinnacle Construction, the exclusive, approved contractor for all HOA projects, charging 35% above market rates, while the HOA collected a 12% administrative fee. My floating home hadn't just challenged Karen's authority, it had threatened her family's financial scheme. After consulting my attorney, I strategically shared the documents with board members known for their integrity. The response was swift. An emergency meeting was called without Karen's knowledge. When she saw the financial documents projected on screen, her face went pale. By meeting's end, she had resigned for personal reasons. 2 other board members stepped down that week. The transformation under new board president Margaret Chen, a retired judge, was remarkable. She eliminated the approved contractor requirement and championed innovation. The final irony? When Karen listed her house for sale, her real estate listing featured view of award-winning architectural lake home as a selling point, with a photo of our floating creation prominently displayed. 3 years later, our floating home has transformed our retirement in ways we never imagined. We wake to gentle movements and changing light playing across the water, while herons visit our deck and fish swim beneath the transparent floor in our reading nook. The technical achievements bring unexpected joys. During thunderstorms, we watch lightning dance across the water from our glass-enclosed upper deck. In winter, the lake's thermal properties reduce our heating costs by 45%. But the simple moments matter most. Coffee at sunrise as mist rises from the water, grandchildren catching their first fish, stargazing from the roof platform while gently rocking on the water. What began as Defiance has become connection. We host the annual 4th of July party with neighbors arriving by canoe. Local students visit to learn about our sustainable systems. And at 61, I've discovered an unexpected second career designing floating structures across 3 states. As Linda told me, retirement was making you restless. You needed a worthy challenge. After decades building structures to connect people, I found purpose creating something that stands apart while bringing people together. Our story spread further than we ever imagined. I've received over 500 emails from homeowners across the country facing similar HOA battles. Many have shared photos of their own creative solutions inspired by our approach. Our 11th victory came when state legislators contacted me while drafting a bill limiting HOA powers. I testified before the committee, sharing documentation of our experience. The resulting legislation, now called the Reasonable Accommodation Act, prevents HOAs from restricting environmentally beneficial improvements and requires transparent financial practices. The community itself has flourished under the new approach. The revised HOA guidelines now emphasize innovation within harmony rather than rigid conformity. A retired carpenter built a playground incorporating natural elements previously forbidden. A young couple installed a rainwater collection system based on our design. Karen's former house was purchased by Thomas, a 34-year-old architect who approached me one morning. "I bought it here specifically because of your floating home," he admitted. "Any community that eventually embraces this kind of innovation is where I want to establish my practice." He now serves on the Architectural Review Committee, bringing fresh perspective to evaluations. The most unexpected outcome? 3 other lake communities in our country have modified their HOA bylaws to explicitly allow floating structures meeting specific environmental standards. Our act of defiance has literally changed the landscape of residential development in the region. Last month, I received the most ironic news of all. Karen, who now lives in a strict covenant-controlled community 2 counties over, has applied for a variance to install solar panels on her roof, using the precedent set by our state's Reasonable Accommodation Act that her actions helped inspire. As I watched the sunset from my floating deck, I realized that this journey taught me something profound. When rules become barriers, innovation becomes the answer. Know the regulations better than those enforcing them. Document everything meticulously. And most importantly, transform obstacles into opportunities. As Thomas, the architect who ironically bought Karen's house, told me, "You didn't just build a house, you changed a paradigm." At 61, I never expected to become an advocate for property rights. Yet here I am, helping others create their own victories against unreasonable restrictions. The best revenge isn't just success. It's creating something so excellent it transforms opposition into opportunity. The view is always better when you've overcome something to enjoy it. Have you faced similar battles? Share your stories below. Until next time, I'll be enjoying the reflection of stars on my private lake, where they said I couldn't build.